The heart of the cards is a load of shit. The best advice is to let yourself be guided by your brain and not the heart of the cards. In order to take it to the next level of Yu-Gi-Oh, you need to listen to logic and logic alone. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about improving in Yu-Gi-Oh, getting yourself to the top tier level player you can be. We're going to be going over how to use logic to improve your deck building skills and math as well. If you guys want to see more Yu-Gi-Oh content from me and the competitive Yu-Gi-Oh and how to improve your gameplay, please make sure to let me know below, like, comment, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell to know when I post again. Whenever you make a decision during a duel or in the deck building process, you need to make sure you rationalize each decision with some sort of reason. I'll use the rest of this video to explain how to use that reason in deck building. I'll elaborate more on gameplay in future videos if you guys want to see more of this type of stuff. Decision making in deck building is where I see people make the most mistakes, and it's something even the smart players in the anime like Kaiba are guilty of. Deciding which cards are good and are worth putting in your deck is an ever-changing topic that will evolve as the card pool does. So it's best not to fixate whether a card is strictly good or bad right now. Say Anti-Spell Fragrance, a card that has changed in how good it is many times over the past 2 decades. What remains the same is the thought process a duel should take to arrive at the number of copies of each card they should be playing within their deck. Assuming the card is good enough to go in our deck, we have to figure out how often we want to draw the card. The obvious choices are cards we only want to play as engine requirements. Stuff we do not want to draw, we just want to be able to search or get out of our deck for whatever reason. An example of this could be Sprite Smashers, Ronin Totem, Gem Knight Garnet. These cards can be easily used at 1 and isn't difficult to understand why. You play 2 of a kind in similar situations, however we need 2 for the combo, or because if 1 is expanded, we may need 1 for the late game. The other reason may be because a card is banished very often off Pot of Desires, or if milled, and you just want to make sure you have the second one available at all times. Rhino Heart could be an example of this. I don't like losing 1 early in the game, using its effect on my opponent's first turn, getting it banished, and then needing the second one later on. Notice, however, that I've omitted from this section cards you want to draw sometimes, but not all the times. People love to use 2 of a card that they don't want to draw multiples of, because they believe it reduces the clogginess of their deck, but that's just not true. We can improve this with some math. So I'm going to link this website below, and I'm going to show you guys what I'm talking about. This is Yu-Gi-Oh! Probability Calculator. You can just Google this and you'll find it, but I also have the link down below. What essentially is a hypergeometric distribution calculator. Now, don't worry if you don't know what that means. It's pretty much just calculating the percentage chances of drawing specific hands, and we get to mess around with the variables, such as the number of cards we play, the number of cards we draw, a number of the specific card we want to play. With that, we can really mess around and look at the odds of drawing any specific combination or lack of. So now let's rewind for a bit and go back to the 2 of discussion. One of the most infamous arguments in Yu-Gi-Oh history has been Pot of Desires. This is a card you play 3 of or 2 of. Now, obviously, it is semi-limited at the current format. However, people argue it's not something that's solved. I really think it should be. The card should have been played at 3 at every deck, and there's an easy way to show it. We've already decided it's a card we want to draw, okay? So we want to draw it. Let's look at the math on drawing it. So here I can write Pot of Desires. Now, for the amounts, say we play 2, and we want to see how often we draw 1 copy. 22.44% chance. Now, what if we add the 3rd copy? It goes up by almost 8%. Obviously, that's a good thing, but we have to consider the downside of drawing multiples. So, okay, let's go back to the 2 and see what the chance of drawing multiples are. Fairly low, less than 1.5%. So let's see what happens if we add the 3rd copy in. We go to 3.64%. Now, as you're a duelist, you're going to be making these trade-offs where you're looking at these numbers and you're going to have to make a decision with an upside and a downside and what's worth it. So is the 7% or almost 8% increase in chance of drawing a single Pot of Desires worth the about 2% chance of drawing multiples? If you think the card is good, the answer is probably yes, that is worth it. Now, there are specific cases where the answer may be no, but in most cases, that answer is yes. Now, this poses a new question. We've decided we want to add the 3rd copy Pot of Desires, but say we could play more than 3 copies of Pot of Desires. How many would we play? Now, this isn't a ridiculous question. For a lot of cards, there are alternatives or substitutes that you can keep putting in to accomplish the same role as the card you were targeting. So, hand traps, for example, you can lump them into a category and then focus on the math on how many hand traps you want to play. Now, you don't want to just play infinite hand traps, and you do reach a certain point where it's no longer worth playing more. And even within the realm of hand traps, some of them do the same thing. Something like Infinite Impermanence, Effect Veiler, and Ghost Mortar Moonlit Chill all serve extremely similar roles. So you have to decide at what point it's no longer worth playing. Let's move to this table here. This table is pretty much summarizing what you would do if you plugged in a bunch of results into that calculator, but it's just a way of displaying it in a way that you can digest a little more easily. Now, to a lot of people, this may not be as easy to digest, but I'm going to do my best to guide you guys through it, and hopefully it makes sense to you by the end of this video. In column B is the number of X per deck. Now, for simplicity's sake, I'm going to get rid of the letter X, and we'll call it hand traps for now, because we want to see how many hand traps we want to play. So in this column is the number of hand traps. So this column here, B2, the cell, would be 1 hand trap in our deck. And then B9 would be 8 hand traps. Simple enough. The second column here is the probability of drawing one of our hand traps. So we can see it starts off with 12.5% and then goes up and goes up and goes up. Now notice that it goes up by smaller and smaller amounts each time. This is intuitive. Of course, as you put more and more in your deck, the chance of drawing clogginess increases, but drawing 1 does not. Column D is the probability of drawing 2 or more hand traps in your hand. As you can see, when you play 1 hand trap, that probability is 0. It's impossible. And then it's going to go up more and more as the cards get added. Now, this, again, it's intuitive. Pretty easy to understand. Column E is the increase in probability by adding 1 more hand trap. So as we go from the first hand trap to the second hand trap, we increase 9.9% to C1. So it's pretty much this number. So column C3 or cell C3 minus C2. So we have a 9.9% increase in drawing our 1 hand trap as we add the second copy. And you can see that amount decreases. This is the first difference, and you can see it as a diminishing return here as we add more cards. Now, column F is going to be the same thing, but for what we have in column D. So the probability increased of drawing multiple copies of our hand traps when we add an extra card. So when we add our third hand trap, the amount of times we draw 2 or more of our hand traps or pot of desires in the last question goes up by 2.36%. Column G is just the difference of these increases. So if we look at column E as our upside and column F as our negatives, what we don't want happening, G is just our net gain. And you can see row number 5 here, the 5th copy. So it's row 6, sorry. We hit 0. This is our equilibrium point. This would be where when we add the 5th copy of our hand trap, we have an equal amount gained of drawing 1 as we do drawing 2 or more. And then afterwards, it becomes negative, which means we get more of the downside versus an upside. And the last column, H, is the total probability to draw it. So pretty much both C and D combined. So any number of hand traps that can be drawn, which is probably the least useful here, but does matter to some degree. So let's talk about this for a second. Are we mad if we draw 2 more hand traps? Well, in most formats, the answer is no, but you could decide that, yes, drawing 2 more hand traps is not what I want. And if that's the case, then you probably wouldn't want to play more than 5. Of course, you could argue it if it's extremely important to see 1. However, if it's not extremely important and it's more negative to see multiples, then you want to stick to around 5. And that's why when I'm building decks with normal summons, if the normal summon isn't extremely integral to my play, I often just play 5 because drawing multiples is a lot more detrimental than seeing 0. Because as I add more to guarantee seeing at least 1, I'm going to be increasing the chance more often that I have dead cards in my hand. And we want as many cards in our hand live as possible. Now, it's important to note here that column C and D are essentially success and failure parameters. We're defining what we want to accomplish and what we don't want to accomplish. If what we want to accomplish includes drawing 2 hand traps, then this isn't really a helpful statistic for us. What we want to do is then figure out the odds of drawing 1 or 2, and the next column could be 3 or more. What I'm kind of getting at here is these numbers are meaningless without context. You do want to have some idea what you're looking for when you're going for these type of math. Have an idea of what you're trying to accomplish, and then look at the best way to optimize that in an efficient way. So if you don't care about drawing 2 of these hand traps, then this first table is irrelevant to you. Now keep in mind also, we're doing this with our deck size held constant at 40 and with our hand size held constant at 5. Now hand size is something you can't mess around with as much. You really only have 5 or 6 to choose from, or if you're looking at board breakers, for example. But you can mess around with these different variables to make other charts and see how they interact. Normal summons is one where you want to look at both how it interacts with a 5 card and a 6 card hand. One thing you'll notice when you're increasing your deck count is the stats don't change that much as you increase it from 40 to a bit above 40. The changes for increasing by 1 card is very minuscule. That's often why you'll see me go above 40. But it's more than just that. Now, let's think about why 40 should matter. Now, the importance of 40 is that it's the lowest number of cards you can play. So in theory, it should be the most consistent deck count. It gives you the highest chance of drawing each number of each specific card in your deck. However, if we could theoretically make a deck more consistent by playing over 40, should we play that Well, yes, because 40 only has meaning in the sense that it's the most consistent. But if that is not true, then don't play 40. Now, what I mean by this is if you can mess around with the ratios and find something that is more consistent, then you should be playing above 40. Now, an example of this is the Goki deck I worked on for 2018 World Championship. I worked pretty hard on managing the ratios on that, and I got to a point where I ended up with 45 cards. Now, the reason is, as I figured, if I add more extenders to the deck and add more hand traps to the deck, but held the number of bricks in my deck constant, I'd be keeping the ratio of hand trap and engine cards consistent with each other and only decreasing the ratio with cards I don't want to draw. By that logic, my consistency actually increases. So by decreasing density of bricks in my deck, I'm now drawing better than my 40 card opponents were. By that logic, you should be playing above 40. However, there's a catch there. Whenever you're playing above 40, you have to make sure these cards you're adding, like extra extenders, extra hand traps, extra engine pieces, do actually keep the power level consistent. If you're adding a card in that is clearly worse, such as you think back removal like Mystical Space Typhoon is good, but then you add in Twin Twister and you don't want to discard stuff, that's no longer as strong. You're adding a card that is a whole power step down from what you wanted. Now, that may be a fictitious scenario, but again, formats change constantly. This decrease in power from our deck is something we want to avoid. We should only want to increase the number of cards in our deck if we can keep this power level constant. It also matters for some cards where you can't keep adding alternatives in, such as in Master Duel with Maxi, there is no alternative to it. So by going above 40, you're just decreasing the chance of seeing maybe the best card in the game. And if that card is going to be dictating the fate of the matches, then maybe it's unreasonable to want to go above 40 and you'd rather maximize your chance of seeing that card. It is something you'd have to weigh the odds against. It's always going to be a cost-benefit analysis. But when you don't have alternatives, sometimes you just have to stick to as low as 40 as possible. Deck building has a lot of complexities to it. A large part of it is understanding a format and a meta, but another part is understanding the theory behind why you choose what number of cards to play. And it's important to have this level of logic and reasoning as a base when you're building your deck, because that logic will be applied to other sections of dueling as well. Once you understand why you're doing what you're doing when you're building your deck, it becomes a lot easier to have a focused goal and have a deck that works cohesively as a unit. I know this video was very dense and technical and mathematical, and it may be something people really aren't too excited to see. A lot of people have asked for educational content from me, and I hope this is something you did learn from and you can add on to your current skill set and maybe keep building on with videos from me or with just more practice with yourself to eventually reach that top echelon of play you may be yearning for. Before I sign off, I'd like to give a quick shout out to Team Samurai X1. You can go check out his store, tsx1.com, find the sleeves that I use for events, and use the code POTATO10 for a 10% discount, or if you buy 2 sleeves, you'll get the third one for free.